Have you ever opened your fridge and found vegetables that looked perfectly fine just a few days ago, only to realize they've already gone soft or started to wilt, even when it doesn't make sense at first? It always feels a bit strange how fast fresh food can turn, especially when you're pretty sure you stored it the right way. But what most people don't really think about is that there are actually simple, almost effortless ways to slow that process down more than you think. In fact, a lot of households in the US quietly use small tricks that cost about $1 or even less. Nothing fancy, no special tools, just small habits that make a bigger difference than you'd expect. And once you see how it works, you might start looking at your fridge a little differently over time. Before we jump into any of the tricks, it actually helps to slow down for a second and look at what's really going on inside your fridge. Because fresh produce doesn't just go bad randomly. It's reacting all the time to moisture, to air, and even to whatever's sitting next to it on the shelf. If there's too much moisture, you start getting that soft, damp environment where mold shows up faster than expected. But if it's too dry, vegetables lose their structure, they shrink, and that crisp texture disappears almost overnight. Then there's something most people don't really notice. Certain fruits like apples, bananas, and tomatoes release natural gases as they ripen. And those gases don't just affect them, they actually speed up everything around them. It's like one item in the fridge is quietly pushing the rest to age faster without you realizing it. On top of that, there are always tiny bacteria and invisible residues on the surface of food. They don't act instantly, but over time, they slowly break things down little by little. So when your food spoils quickly, it's not just bad luck or poor storage. It's more like a small chain reaction happening quietly every day inside your fridge. The interesting part is that you don't need to fight all of it at once. A few small adjustments can actually interrupt that process in a very simple way. One of the simplest tricks you'll see in a lot of US households is something that almost feels too basic to matter: white vinegar mixed with water. But people still use it for a reason. You don't need anything special for it, just a small bowl, a bit of white vinegar, and clean water from the tap. That's really it. The common mix is about 1 part vinegar to 3 parts water. From there, people will gently rinse their fruits and vegetables, or sometimes let them sit in the solution for just a short moment before rinsing again with plain water. And it's important to be clear here, it's not about changing the flavor of the food or doing anything complicated. It's more about dealing with what you can't easily see on the surface. Things like light bacteria, tiny mold spores, or leftover residue that can quietly speed up spoilage once the food is in your fridge. After the produce is dried properly, many people notice it tends to hold up better over time. Leafy greens stay a bit firmer. Berries don't break down as quickly. It's not a dramatic transformation, but it's noticeable enough when you compare it day by day. What makes this trick popular is how simple it is. It almost feels like a reset for the surface of your food before you store it. And surprisingly, white vinegar in the US is extremely cheap, often around $1 in discount stores, sometimes even less. Still, there's one thing people learn quickly. You don't want to overdo it. A quick rinse is all you need. If you let produce soak for too long, especially softer fruits or greens, the texture can start to break down instead of improving it. Another trick that sounds almost too simple to work uses something you probably already have in your kitchen: paper towels. Most people don't really think about moisture once food goes into a container or a plastic bag. But that's actually where a lot of the problem starts. When vegetables are sealed inside, especially in the fridge, condensation slowly builds up. You don't always see it at first, but that trapped water creates the kind of environment where food breaks down faster than expected. That's where a paper towel makes a difference. Instead of letting moisture sit directly around your produce, people line the container or storage bag with a sheet of paper towel. It just sits there quietly, pulling in the extra humidity before it can settle on the food itself. It's not doing anything dramatic, no special process. It just gives that excess moisture somewhere to go, and the difference becomes noticeable over time. Leafy greens don't collapse as quickly. Strawberries stay firm instead of turning soft and mushy within a day or two. Even fresh herbs tend to keep their structure a bit longer than usual. What makes this trick interesting is that there's really no technique to learn. You're not pressing, measuring, or timing anything. You're just creating a small buffer between your food and the moisture inside the container. When the paper towel gets damp, you simply replace it. That's it. Nothing complicated, nothing expensive, and yet it quietly extends the life of food in a way most people don't expect at first. It's one of those habits that almost feels unnecessary, until you open the fridge a few days later and realize everything is still holding up better than usual. One small mistake a lot of people make without even realizing it is storing all their produce together in the same space. It feels natural. Everything goes into the fridge. Everything stays fresh, right? But in reality, different foods affect each other in ways most people never notice. Fruits like apples, bananas, avocados, and even tomatoes release a natural gas as they ripen. It's a normal part of how they mature, but there's a side effect. That gas doesn't just stay with the fruit, it spreads to nearby produce and quietly speeds up the ripening process. So when leafy greens are sitting too close to those fruits, they often start to yellow, soften, and wilt much faster than expected. Sometimes it looks like they went bad for no reason at all, but it's really just that interaction happening in the background. The fix is surprisingly simple. Separation. You don't need anything new or expensive. Just giving fruits and vegetables their own space makes a noticeable difference. Different drawers in the fridge, separate containers, or even a bit of distance on the shelf is often enough to slow things down. And once you start paying attention to it, you might notice something interesting. Those random cases where vegetables seem to spoil too quickly, they don't happen as often anymore. It's one of those small changes that doesn't feel important at first, until you realize how much longer everything is actually lasting. Fresh herbs are usually the first thing to go bad in the fridge. You buy a bunch of cilantro or parsley, and within a couple of days it already starts to wilt, even if everything else still looks fine. But there's a simple method a lot of people use that actually changes how long they last. Instead of wrapping herbs tightly in plastic or just leaving them in the bag they came in, they're treated more like small bouquets, almost like something you'd put on a table, not something you'd forget in the fridge. You trim the bottom of the stems slightly, just enough to refresh them. Then you place the herbs in a glass or jar with a small amount of water, enough to keep the stems hydrated. After that, you loosely cover the top with a plastic bag before putting it in the fridge. It sounds almost too simple, but it works because the stems keep drawing water, just like a flower would. That steady hydration slows down the wilting process and helps herbs like cilantro, parsley, or green onions stay fresh for several extra days. And when you open the fridge, it actually looks different too. Instead of a crumpled plastic bundle, you see something that feels more alive, almost like a small reminder that food doesn't always have to fade so quickly if it's handled a bit more carefully. Sometimes it's surprising how something this small can change the way you think about storage. It's not about doing more work, just doing it a little different. Most refrigerators in the US come with those crisper drawers at the bottom, but surprisingly, a lot of people don't actually use them the way they're designed to be used. They're not just extra storage space. Those drawers are meant to control humidity, and that small detail makes a bigger difference than most people expect. Typically, one drawer holds higher humidity, which is better for leafy greens and vegetables that need moisture to stay crisp. The other drawer stays drier, which works better for fruits that don't handle too much humidity. When you use them the right way, your produce stays closer to the environment it naturally prefers, instead of constantly adjusting to random temperature and moisture changes every time the fridge door opens. But when everything gets mixed together, or when items are placed in the wrong drawer, things start to spoil in a way that feels random. Greens wilt faster, fruits soften unevenly, and it can seem like the fridge just isn't keeping anything fresh. In reality, nothing is really wrong with the food. It's just not being stored in the right conditions. And that's usually the part people overlook. First, the idea that sometimes it's not about what you're storing at all, it's about where you're putting it inside the fridge. When you put all of these tricks together, none of them really feels dramatic on its own. A quick rinse here, a paper towel in a container, maybe just separating a few things in the fridge. Individually, they seem almost too small to matter. But when you start doing them consistently, you notice the difference. Food stays fresher a little longer. Things don't spoil quite as fast as they used to. And maybe that's the real idea behind it. It's not about finding one perfect solution. It's just a few small habits, done regularly, that quietly change how long your food lasts without you really thinking about it. Sometimes I think about how much food we end up throwing away, just because we didn't really understand how fragile it actually is. It's not that people don't care. It's more that most of us were never really shown how to slow things down in a simple way. What surprises me is how little it actually takes to make a difference. Small habits, small adjustments, nothing complicated. So I wonder, do people usually lose food because of time itself, or just because of small habits they never noticed? Either way, once you start paying attention, even something as ordinary as a fridge starts to feel a bit more alive than you expect.